It's time to listen to ghost stories. Let's listen to some true paranormal tales. Story 1. Story 1 comes from Reddit from user Lucky Reputation 398. This is 100% true. About 12 years ago, I was doing a job as a self-employed plasterer in Ashington, Northumberland, England. I was working in my hometown. Anyway, the house I was working on was a decent size, and I was there quite a while. They had brought the two houses next door to each other, and making it into one big house. Living in the house was the dad, ma'am, and a daughter. One day I was working on the staircase in this house. The ma'am had said to me she was going out, but if Emma, the daughter, came back home, that I can tell her the ma'am was away to shop and then going for petrol and won't be long. No problem. So I'm working on the stairs, and I go down to the bottom of the stairs to the kitchen to get a new water in my bucket. So was downstairs maybe 2 minutes at most. Went back up the stairs and heard someone crying. I could tell it was a girl. Now, with the house originally being two houses getting made into one, there was 4 doors in the house. 2 doors in the front, 2 back doors, and also 2 staircases linking it into one big staircase. So I thought Emma had come home through a door at the back, up the other staircase, and into her room when I was downstairs. Then I heard more crying, and I heard plain as day, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry." And then I heard a muffle, and all was quiet. Anyway, the ma'am came back and asked if Emma was home. I was saying she was, and she sounded upset. Her mobile phone rang, and it was Emma, phoning her ma'am to see if she could pick her up from her friends. She wasn't in the house, after all. Ma'am asked which room. I'd heard the crying in the voice, and the muffled tone, and when I told her, her face went white. It turns out the lady from the house had hung herself in that very room only 2 years prior. She left behind a young daughter. Story 2. Short story on my ghost sighting at Hume Lake. It's been a long time since this happened. I think 2006-ish? I can't remember the exact year, but it was shortly before I entered high school. I did one of those week-long Christian summer camps with my school at Hume Lake in California. I've done a little internet searching, but never found other stories connected with the campground. I'm hoping, by sharing mine here, that maybe someone else will have experienced something similar in that place. One night, everyone in the camp gets into the big auditorium and speakers talk about life, death, Jesus, you know, the works. They had that silent time, and I was feeling emotional at that point because a cousin had passed away within the last year, and everything they talked about just combined and overwhelmed me. So I wanted to go back to the cabin, to be by myself, and maybe cry a bit. I'm normally a scaredy cat with a big imagination of the dark, but with all that, all I was thinking of was I didn't feel scared to walk alone. The cabin was close to the edge of the camp, with a dirt road separating it from the woods. There were orange streetlights on the road, and I was walking up, but not on that road where it teed off. At the T in the road, right in the tree line, was a human-sized white shape, like it was made of white light. No distinguishable legs or arms, but I could clearly see the head and shoulders. So picture a head shape down to the shoulders, and then the sides just went straight down to the ground. There were no strange sounds or anything else. I fucking bolted back down the way I came and bumped into my group of the cabin mates since the auditorium event had finished. One tried to say that maybe I saw a cougar or perhaps a wild animal. And for years, I would involuntarily tear up and get chills and goosebumps even when retelling this. Since then, I also tear up when I hear other first-person ghost stories. I wish I hadn't gotten scared at the time. But anyway, I've always hoped I'm not the only one to have seen something there. Ghost Story 3. The Strong Man. I, 29 female, have always had spooky happenings go on around me. I have multiple stories of seeing shadow people and spirits, and hearing of stuff that was less than natural. I might post about those other experiences someday, but for now, I will just tell the stories of a demon that followed my family around for quite a while. I haven't talked about this in years, as I hated how crazy it made me sound. I also don't like talking about it, because it tends to make activity start up again. But, luckily, no one in my family has experienced these things since I last saw him in 2012. I'll try to keep the stories as brief as possible, and only list what details are necessary. But buckle up, because there was a lot of activity for many years. A bit of background information. I grew up in a non-denominational Christian household. My dad, in particular, was a very strong believer. After him, my sister and I are the biggest believers, and my brother is now an atheist, though he was a believer at the time. My mum didn't experience this demon at all. In the house were my dad, my mum, my older brother, sister, and I. My dad was the first one who saw him. It was in the early 2000s, I think 2001 or 2002, and my dad was studying to become a commercial airline pilot. He was licensed to fly helicopters and private Cessnas and jets, but he wanted to expand his horizons and challenge himself in a new way. He used to get up and around in 4 a.m. to study, so that he wouldn't lose any time during work. He operated a flight school in our hometown, so he was a busy guy. Or during family time after my siblings and I would get home from school, my dog would always accompany him to the dining room, which is where he would set up for the morning. One of these mornings, my dog went to the sliding glass door that led to the backyard from the dining room and started barking like she was going mad. My dad ran to let her out before she woke anyone up, but she immediately started whining and backed away from the door once he had it open. My dad, who initially thought she had seen a possum or a coyote, as we were used to getting them in our backyard often, told her to go outside and chase whatever it was out of our yard. Usually, she would tear off like a bolt of lightning, but she just continued to whine and back up further and further. My dad looked out the door to see if he could see what was scaring her so badly, and that was when we saw him. A large, hulking black figure that was moving very slowly, encircling the house next door. As soon as he saw him, my dad gasped and froze in place. When he gasped, the figure stopped, and it turned its head slowly towards my dad. He didn't really have a face, but my dad felt its eyes on him. As soon as it looked at him, the words, "strong man," popped up into my dad's head. He knew then that is what it was called. They stared at each other for a bit before strong man eventually turned its head back, forward, and then resumed the slow march around the house next door. I was only 9 or 10 at that time, so I didn't even hear this story until much later, but it does mark the first time anyone in my family saw him. After that, my dad would periodically look out the windows when he was studying to check before he would let the dog out to do her business, and he would see him from time to time, but now, instead of circling the house next door, he would be circling ours. The next person to see him was my brother. At this time, my brother was a typical angsty teenager, with an added helping of snark. He was about 14 or 15, and going through a hard time at school, which made him act out at home. My parents were struggling with how to reconnect him, and coming up short. One night my brother was listening to music in his room and brooding over something or another, as you do when you've got more big feelings than you know how to handle. When he saw a giant shadow rise up from the bottom of his window past the top, he had heard my dad's story by this point, and he knew immediately that this was what he was seeing. Now, this next part is going to sound ridiculous because, well, let's be honest, because it is ridiculous. My brother growled at it. Yes, you heard me, literally growled. As you might suspect, nothing happened. My brother started feeling this really oppressive energy and then said, "You're not welcome here." Strong man, I'm just going to start calling him SM because I hate saying or even typing that name, didn't move. My brother then said, "In the name of Jesus, leave." He then slowly started to move away. Around this time, my sister, at the time 13 or 14, was at home alone one night. She was in the living room, watching the TV, when she heard a knock at the front door. She went to go and check it, but didn't see anyone there. She shrugged it off and went to go back to watch TV. She then heard a knock on the sliding glass door in the dining room. Now, she is spooked because that goes to our backyard, and why would someone knock on that door? She doesn't get up to look and kind of huddles into the blankets trying to hide. Then she hears a knock at the French doors that lead to the backyard from the living room, essentially right next to where she is sitting. She immediately started to pray, and then heard knocking coming from all 3 doors at once. We came home to find her sobbing and huddled in a ball of blankets in her room. After this, I was finally told about what my dad had been seeing and what my brother had experienced. We don't know if what happened to my sister was because of SM, but it definitely intended to scare her. After this, the sightings and experiences seemed to slow down a bit. It would always pick right back up if any of us talked about it, either with each other or to an outside party. In 2005, my dad died in a routine flight check. I'm sorry to hear that. And my whole family kind of imploded. My mum went off the deep end into alcoholism and shut down. My brother was away doing his service with the Finnish military, and my sister and I really only had each other to cling on to. My sister kind of became my secondary mum and was dealing with the stresses of her senior year of high school and trying to find out what she was going to do for college. To this point, I had never experienced anything supernatural. I started doubting God. I stopped even going to church. It wasn't much that I didn't believe in God anymore, but it was that I was bitterly angry at him for taking away my dad and the effect that it had on my family. My mum decided that we couldn't live in a house that had so many memories of my dad, so she brought the house next door. Not the one from the beginning of this story, if you remember, but the one on the other side. I was 14 at this time, as it was right next door. We took our time with moving. A few months after moving, I had my first experience with SM. The house we moved into was a 2-story, and my new bedroom faced our old house, and we had the wooden fence separating the 2 backyards right underneath it. One night I was up late, reading, and my mum was out drinking with some colleagues. My brother and sister were now in college and living in the dorms on campus. My dog was with me in my bedroom, so I felt comfortable. As I was reading, I started to feel heavy. I don't know how to really describe it, other than feeling wrong and heavy. I chalked it up to Home Alone jitters and went on reading. As I was reading, I started hearing a scratching on the fence below my window. My dog started growling intermittently, and I would just have to tell her to shush, because I thought it was just a possum. As I said before, we got them a lot in that area. It wasn't until a few minutes passed that I started to realize the scratches were coming in rounds of threes. Scritch, scritch, scritch. Pause. Scritch, scritch, scritch. So on and so on for a good long while. The feeling of heaviness increased, and I started to feel some fear prickling along my skin. I closed my book, and then the scratching stopped. I waited a minute, and I didn't hear anything, so I just opened my book back up to keep reading, and then the scratching started again. I closed my book again, and it stopped mid-scratch. Even though I was feeling far from God, I started praying for Jesus to take away all the evil in the house and to send his light in his stead. And I prayed and prayed and prayed, and then the scratching got louder and louder. The louder I prayed until finally I said Amen, and then the scratching stopped fully. I couldn't sleep after that, and had to wait for my mum to come home around 4 a.m. About a year or so later, my sister and I went on a trip to Finland to visit my grandparents. While there, I had a crazy dream. While I was napping on my grandparents' couch, I won't post the entirety of it, unless anyone's interested, but essentially, I dreamed that I was getting possessed, and was woken up by my grandma saying I was doing things in my sleep that I felt myself doing in my dream. It was really freaky, and I hated it. Around this time, I also started waking up around 3 a.m. every night. This continued when we went back home, and eventually it just became part of life. I didn't think anything of it until I was telling a friend about my sleep issues, and she told me that 3 a.m. was the demonic witching hour. Cool, cool, cool. After this summer, my mum got remarried to my stepdad, and we moved to his house. His house was in the older part of town, with lots of beautiful Victorians on the tree-lined streets. It was picturesque, to say the least. Regardless, this is where the most of the activity happened. I have story upon story of the different activities happening in this house, but those are better told another time, as they don't necessarily relate to SM. I have multiple times when the same feeling of heaviness that accompanied him would just come up upon me, and I would pray him away. I saw him just one last time at this house. I was coming home from an evening church service and was about to turn into the driveway when he just rose up, seemingly from the ground, right in front of my car. I thought I was going to hit something solid, as I just drove right through him and turned into my drive. I was so scared to get out of my car, but that overwhelming feeling became too oppressive, and I had to get away. I started praying out loud, and I ran into my house. I saw him one other time in college, outside of my dorm room, when I looked out the window one evening after a night of late studying. He always showed up when these things would start to feel normal again, almost as if to say, I'm still here. It was awful. That was the last time I saw him, and I haven't had a demonic experience since, thank God. Sorry this was so long. It just happened over many, many years. I don't randomly wake up at 3 a.m. anymore, and I don't get that oppressive heavy feeling randomly either. I hope I never experience either of those things ever again. Also, sorry if there's any typos. No, you're good, there weren't. I typed this out on my phone and had to stop and start repeatedly due to chasing around my 2-year-old and taking care of a 6-month-old. Door opened. Last night, my husband and I were in bed. He was asleep and I was still awake, scrolling on my phone. I heard a loud thump and instantly got a bad feeling. I tried to wake my husband up, but he just said, I locked the doors. Something probably fell. And I went back to sleep. I thought, okay, whatever, and got up to use the bathroom and lock our bedroom door because, well, I'm paranoid. While trying to fall asleep, every time I was almost asleep, something would jerk me awake. Not physically jerk me, but I would jump and have a feeling that someone was there. At one point, I thought I heard a woman whisper, but I brushed it off as me half asleep. The next morning, I woke up. My husband had already left for work. I have a baby, so I got him out of a bassinet beside the bed and fed him, and he goes back to sleep. I get up and make some breakfast. When I went to the living room, I see my backpack for school had fallen off the couch in a weird position. There was no way it could have fallen on its own that way. Plus, it had been on the couch for hours earlier when I came home and never touched it again, so I don't know why it fell. I left the door cracked open to my bedroom so my dog could wander around while I ate. While I was sitting up in bed, facing the bedroom door, it pushes open. My stomach drops. I have a terrible feeling of dread. I'm going over logical reasons in my head why this could happen. First, I look at my dog. He's asleep on his back next to me. I look at the fans. They're all off. I listen for heat and air. It's not running. I'm freaking out, calling my husband, and I look over at my baby, and he's woken up for no reason. Like whatever it was had startled him too. Maybe this is all just coincidence, but the feeling of dread that came over me both times is concerning. I'm going to put up a camera in the living room tonight and see if I catch anything. Hopefully, I don't. The night my dad heard the same voice I did. I've never really believed in ghosts, but something happened a few years ago that still sticks with me. I was home from work, sleeping in my room, around 2 a.m. I woke up out of nowhere. No nightmare, no noise, just that weird feeling of something's wrong. I sat up, and I heard it clear as day, a woman's voice whispering my name, not once but twice. It came from a hallway just outside my door. I froze. It didn't sound threatening, but it definitely wasn't familiar either. I thought maybe it was the TV, but everything was off. Eventually I chalked it up to dreaming while half awake and went back to bed. The next morning over breakfast, my dad casually asked me, "Did you get up last night? I thought I heard something say your name in the hallway." I hadn't told anyone what I had heard. We just kind of stared at each other for a second, then changed the subject. He still doesn't talk about it. Nothing else ever happened after that. But that one moment is burned into my brain. I don't know what we heard, but I'm pretty sure we both heard the same thing. Haunted restaurant. So this started around 2020. My dad worked at a restaurant/hotel called The Barn in Hockley Heath. It had a Premier Inn attached to it. Around the back of the building was a staff house for the workers who had nowhere to stay. This is how I met one of my friends. She used to sleep over to visit her dad the same time as me. The staff house halls were creepy, and there used to be this laundry room that we would hang out in. All sorts of spooky stuff happened in there. The lights would turn off on their own. We would hear creaking. We even heard a clown laugh once. In 2022, I got a part-time job there as a waiter. One night as we were closing up, I went into this long, narrow storage closet to grab some forks, and as I was walking back out, I walked into a little boy who would have been walking into the closet. I said, "Oh, sorry, I didn't see you there." And then it clicked in my head that he shouldn't be in there, and so I turned back around to say something to him, but he was gone. There's only one exit through that closet, and I was standing in the way. There was a part of the restaurant where it was protected by some sort of spirit. I'll get into that later on. The restaurant had burned down twice. The section that had survived both fires was at that time only a bit made from some wood. In that area, a lady who was staying in the Premier Inn had hung herself. Later in the year, I had moved into a cleaner and was working as a receptionist in that hotel. When you went to clean the room, that woman who hung herself was staying in where she had offed herself and ended her life. Anything you cleaned would be instantly messed up again. Handprints on the mirror, an imprint of a human on the bed, water turning on by itself, etc. The restaurant closed down a couple of months ago due to some circumstances, but now it is just the Premier Inn. Lived in a haunted house that made me believe. TLDR, lived in a haunted house. Tried to commune with the presences. I asked for validation or proof that this was real. I received validation from a random stranger that I'd met at a party. Then things got weirder. I'm watching ghost stories from Reddit on YouTube and decided to find a thread to share my story. This story is from around 2007 to 2008. In 2005, I moved into an old house in a suburb of Pittsburgh, PA. The house was in the middle of a town in what appeared to be a plot of land that the elderly owner had refused to sell. There were businesses all around us. The benefit was that I rarely needed to drive anywhere. I had restaurants, bars, grocery stores, and even a movie theater all in walking distance. The house was a small 2-bed, 1-bath that couldn't have been 1,000 square feet. It had an old stone wall, a damp basement, and a well water tank. I thought it was odd, considering we're in the middle of the city, and city water would be easily accessible. Anyway, the point is, the house was very small and old. Sometime after moving in, we invited some good friends to become roommates. In total, there were 4 people living in this home, which were 2 couples. It was a great time. I was in my lower 20s, and we had parties all the time. I'm not sure how long it took me to notice, but I wasn't the first person to point out to the group. I and others started to notice and talk more frequently about the shadow people. These people would dart around the house. We'd even see them outside. Our house was surrounded by trees in all directions. We were cut off from the city that surrounds those trees. It was great, but it made for a very creepy scene at night. First, it was the shadow people. Many times, when I was alone in the house, I'd be at my computer playing loud music and playing video games. I'd often hear whispering and see shadows in my peripheral vision. I could turn the music off and the voices would stop. I'd say out loud, "I can hear or see you. Please, leave me alone. I'm just trying to enjoy my night." I could turn back on the music and hear the faint whispering again. At night, I would always feel eyes just staring at me. It was especially strong when I was alone. One of my roommates suggested a Ouija board, but I strongly protested. My mum got one when I was around 12, and it did not go well, so I'm scared of them 100%. It was around this time that I decided to pursue whatever this feeling was. I thought, if I can feel it this often, it has to be real in some sort of way. I started reading books about ghosts and people who call themselves mediums. I started meditating and opening myself up to that world. Was this a good idea? Probably not, but it led down a path that had a very surprising ending. During this time, unknown to me, one of my roommates was doing the same thing. The girlfriend of my friend started trying to communicate whatever it was that was in this house. Probably a bad idea as well, I know. In my own meditations, I came to the conclusion that there were two main presences: a little girl and a tall man in dark, well-fit clothes. Neither felt bad or evil in any way, but the man felt protective of the girl. I thought that there was a chance that I'm just being dumb or maybe even going crazy. While meditating, I asked for validation. If I'm dumb, then nothing would happen, right? I put out a request to the void, so to speak. Well, this was around Christmas. I had a party at work, and they rented out an entire restaurant and even had an open bar. I got a ride with a co-worker who was a good friend of us all and knew about our ghosts as well. She briefly lived at the house prior to our current roommates moving in. So, where I worked was a non-conventional job. I worked at a place that sold adult movies online. They didn't make them, but were and are well known for being a major retailer and has even won awards in the industry. So very often, celebrities of said movie would come to our parties. Well, after several drinks, my co-worker decided to lead me up to one of them to introduce me. She had a dark sense of humor and wanted me to make a fool of myself to a pretty girl. Well, freaking backfired in the oddest way possible. This woman looked me dead in the face as though she knew who I was, or as if we had met before. She looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Your friend, name of a roommate, will be okay." My blood chilled to the bone. How the hell could she know his name? 2. The little girl in your house needs to pass on. Ice filled my body. She mentioned a third thing that I cannot recall. Afterwards, we talked for around 30 minutes. She explained that she was also exploring the supernatural, and we connected because both of us share the same astrological sign of Sagittarius. She showed me a Sagittarius tattoo that was on her ankle. She was very nice, and I even met her again at next year's party. I know her stage name, but I will not share it here for privacy reasons. That's kind of you to do that. Now, back to what she said. I've no idea what she could have meant by the first thing. My roommate is fine. Well, that night I went home a bit drunk, got a ride home and passed out. I was awake at 3 a.m. to my girlfriend and a cop standing in my bedroom doorway. I was urged to go to the living room and sit down in a chair. There were 10 to 15 cops searching the entire house. I had no idea what the hell was going on. And keep in mind, I was still quite drunk. My roommate had been busted with drugs in a sting operation. That night, he'd gone across state line to get a huge supply of a certain type of drug and was busted for it. They were waiting for him in our driveway. Long story short, he was never convicted of anything afterwards. In other words, he was fine. Months later, I told him about what the adult film star told me, and he insisted that I put him in contact with her, but I refused. Good for you, reader, on that. Now, the little girl is something of a longer story, but basically, we got a medium involved to help her pass on. After that, all activities stopped. The air in the house felt lighter and free. We never noticed how heavy the atmosphere felt in the house until it was actually gone. I know that feeling well. I put out the request and received verification that there is indeed something out there. After all was resolved, I cut all ties with the other side. I feel as if I dealt with it enough. I know how it feels to step over the boundary, and will take that stride when it is my time. Sorry this was so long, but the coincidences in the story led me to believe that there is, in fact, a lot more to this world than we can see. Story 8. Stuck. This is the story of Anton. I worked in San Jose for Maxter and worked with Anton. In 1994, the company decided to close the San Jose branch and offer employees the option to move to Colorado. I took the job and transferred. They also offered Anton a position, which he accepted. After a year, I moved to another company. Anton and I saw each other playing pool, drinking beer on the regular. We spent the time in my basement, in the shop, or around the table. One evening, as I was watching the movie The Client, the scene where the attorney hooks a hose up to his car to kill himself, a shiver ran through my body, and a phone call broke the tension. I think I know what's going to happen here. It was Anton's wife looking for him, and the TV was running. The RV, rather, was... I definitely know what's going to happen. The RV was running with a hose in the exhaust. Oh dear, I don't know if I can keep reading this one. I'm going to keep reading it. It's pretty grim though. I got in my truck and broke many speed limits. I saw the RV was running, the garden hose taped to the exhaust pipe. The buck knife came out, and I sliced the hose as I reached for the door. It was locked. I found a tool in the garage and broke the door open. I yelled for his wife to call 911 immediately, and then entered the RV. It was immediately hard to breathe. The back door to the bedroom was locked, and instantly became kindling. I shedded the door, and found my friend blue and unresponsive. I pulled my buddy out of the RV door, and we landed in the ground, in a pile. I immediately started CPR on him. The sirens could be heard in the background as I fought to breathe life back into him. The cops arrived and helped to try and resuscitate him. I learned that night that CPR will wear you out. You got that right. The reason why I have told that is that when I was trying to bring him back to life, his spirit was playing my bass guitar in the basement. My wife, kids, and family friend heard it as the house shook from playing. They thought I was home. I wasn't. Seems Anton's spirit landed in my basement and continued to be present in my house for 25 years till I moved, stuck, as it were. I bought his baby grand piano that belonged to his grandmother, who taught piano. It was a beautiful piano. Still played great, but it was haunted. It was not a player piano. You had to touch the keys to play it. During nights around 3 a.m, the piano would start to play by itself. Not a whole song, but like a section out of Mozart piece, always different, over and over again for a few minutes. I would go down to the steps to see what was going on. After a while, it stopped. On the 3rd step from the bottom, I could watch the keys actually move and listen to music. But any further down, the music would stop. At first it was a bit scary. Let's get back to Anton. It was his grandmother's piano, but he made himself known to be a guest in the house. Usually when he stayed at my house, he would enter a bedroom and take a look, turn away, and close the door. Many people mentioned him that stayed overnight. He also played with the light switches. I had to scold him on occasion not to mess with my kids. It seems kids could see him easier than adults. Go figure. The last time I saw him was when we were wiring my basement and installing the lights in the ceiling. I had two buddies helping, and we figured a process for installing the lights. As we were working on one, I saw him in the corner of my eye and didn't flinch, but Ty saw him too. Ty looked at me and asked, "Who is that?" I smiled. My other buddy had seen Anton previously and knew what the deal was. I asked Ty, what he saw. Was it a dude? Was he older or younger? Was he white or black? Clean shaven or bearded? And what was he wearing? Ty answered my question, and then asked why I was smiling. I then told him of Anton, and that he had just seen a ghost. He said he didn't believe in ghosts, but now he does. The difference with that encounter was that it was a bright light, not dark, which was different than before. When I moved, I invited Anton to come with me, but I haven't felt him. I did smudge the house and tried to release him. Suicide seems to have ramifications. Wow, that was a story. Thank you for telling that. Honestly, of all the ones that I've read on this one, that one was very impactful, and I absolutely believe that one is 100% true. Story 9. Out-of-body experience with a spirit. I truly believe in spirits, as this had been a strange but real experience. It happened around 2018, when I went with my classmates on a trip to a biology institution/exhibition to examine bones and dried skeletons for a life-drawing sketch tour. We reached a section where there were real mummified limbs on display. These were donated parts from real deceased people. And the last one was a dried half-skeleton covered in a white sheet. I was very frightened to see a real corpse, so I didn't come any nearer. Just as the guide stopped people to talk, my body suddenly froze, and I felt a presence of spirit around me. The bright room lights faded away, as was all dark around me. I felt as if my soul was pulled out of my body, and the spirit was holding up one of my hands. As I can only guess, I'm being taken to the afterlife. Very briefly, I saw my classmates from above in a split second. I left and floated above windows and had different scenes playing out in front of me. The spirit was female. She didn't talk, but sent me images and messages. Don't be afraid of me. Don't be fearful. I got this feeling that she was a kind elderly woman in life and that she died peacefully. I saw a classroom, a clinic with a doctor's chair and then needles. When she was done, I was gradually brought back into my body as I felt my physical body waking up and the lights came back into my vision. I felt myself tearing up after that experience, and it was hard to explain, and I was still standing in the same spot. The guide was still talking, and the words that caught my ears were, "This corpse belonged to an old kind woman who generously gave her body for research." Wow. It made me believe that there are kind ghosts too. Not all are malicious, like in films. Ghost Story 10. Inexplicable incidents that I have experienced. Please find below some descriptions of the seemingly inexplicable events that I have experienced through the years. 1. Circa 1989. The first involved a Ouija board, like setup, which me and a friend had been using. One day another friend joined us. He was doubtful of such things. In order to put it to the test, we suggested that he ask a question to the board, which only he would know the answer to. His question was, "What was my brother's name?" My friend and I were immediately confused, as we knew him to only have one female sibling. However, the glass duly began to move towards the various letters, spelling out a name. Our friend was visibly taken aback. The answer was correct. Apparently, before both he and his sister were born, his mother had actually given birth to a boy who unfortunately only lived for a few days. We also asked for whereabouts of a dead brother's resting place. The answer was also correct. Though, to be fair, the board had spelled out the name of our town's main cemetery, so it was no greater revelation. 2. Circa 1998. One early afternoon, whilst packing up my apartment in readiness to move home, I sat down on the couch to grab a smoke. As I sat there, my attention was quickly drawn towards movement from above the fireplace. The large mirror installed above it was pulling itself away from the wall by this one side. It reached an impossible point where it was perpendicular to its original placing and then crashed to the floor. On hearing the commotion, my landlady, who ran the newsagents downstairs, bolted up into my flat to check I was okay. This must take place in the UK. In response, all I could think was to say, I don't think somebody wants me to leave. I should say in no way do I consider myself to be as sensitive, because, if anything, during my time here, to me, the apartment actually felt sterile. 3. Circa 2000. I was staying with a friend on a weekend away. On the Saturday morning, I'd awake early and breakfasted. Having a few hours to spare while my friend was working, I returned to my bedroom and laid on the bed reading. Having nodded off back to sleep, I was awoken to what felt like a dog had jumped up on the bed and was clumsily attempting to walk over my legs. Disturbingly, I seemed unable to open my eyes, as whatever was on the bed with me moved up to be standing uncomfortably heavy on my chest. In response, I sat up forcibly, even then to open my eyes, finding myself alone in the room. My friend had no dog or other pets. However, on this occasion, as strange as it was, actually turned out to be the first of several incidents of sleep paralysis. I subsequently went on to experience, never encountering the old hag, which many fellow sufferers experience. My last experience involved falling asleep in a field and imagining a large donkey suddenly sitting down on me. On forcing myself upright, awake, no such donkey was anywhere near me. This final experience seemed to assuage any supernatural doubts I had regarding my experiences. 4. 2001. Shortly after my mother passed away, coincidentally on September 11th, 2001, I had a dream about her, in which I was crying very hard. In this dream, I was bawling so hard that whatever I was wearing began to feel so constrained around my neck it was choking me. I then recall looking up at my mother's face, which showed having concern. At that point, I awoke, and with a start, crying and checking as the cord of my dressing gown I'd fallen asleep wearing had become tightly wrapped around my neck. Ooh. It was as though she had saved me before I choked to death. 5. One evening after returning home from an evening at a bar, a close friend and I were sat in his lounge chatting. At one point, not paying too much attention, out of the corner of my eye, I vaguely registered the mass of a passing presence on my right, which seemingly had walked through the lounge and then exited the room through a doorway which led to the stairway, which led upstairs to the bedrooms. I asked my friend whether that was his son, who may have been returning to bed upstairs after visiting the bathroom. My friend had also noticed the exact same dark body mass pass by us, and assumed the same thing. However, at that point, we both came to the realization that nobody had previously come past us in the opposite direction of the bathroom. Mystified, I went to the bottom of the stairs and called up to my friend's son, only to hear loud snores in response. Comparing what we'd both absent-mindedly noticed as our full attention was elsewhere with each other, both of us could only describe as noticing a dark presence/mass passing through the room past us. Next day, we asked my friend's son if he had come down, passing us to use the bathroom, and he had not. Interestingly, the house had been built by a bizarre religious sect that was the same of its followers as part of the Jezreel's Tower grounds. More information regarding this fascinating, though now long-gone addition to the Gillingham skyline. 6/7. There was a link there, but obviously I can't put it in on this podcast. 6/7. 2 inexplicable incidents occurred in my last home, alone, in the flat. I was sat in bed watching a large TV screen at the bed's bottom when suddenly it was as though someone behind the appliance had given it a hard punch. The last incident I experienced was also when I sat in bed. From right next to me, clear as day, I heard someone/something cough loudly into my left ear. Again, I was alone in my flat. Story 11. Ghost Train. All my life, I had been obsessed with trains. So when my photography class's topic for the month was transportation, I knew I wanted to get photos of trains. For a little background, all my life I have lived and currently still do live in a house that is right next to a train track owned by the Norfolk Southern. So these are the only trains that go through. Background over. The past couple of days, I've been going to these tracks and waiting around for 2 hours on average for a train to appear right over the horizon. Because the way that certain track works is, one direction is a 3-mile straight track, and then the other way has a railroad crossing. This will be important later. Eventually, a train will go by. I'll get my photos, and I'll go home. But last night I got really upset over a girl, and just my friends groups in general, and something in the back of my mind wanted to go to the train tracks and just relax. Keep in mind, this was at 12:30 at night. Anyway, I walk up there, and a homeless lady that has been staying near the tracks for the past 2 weeks was gone, and so I'm completely alone, with only a street light to light the way. But I could see fine. I sit on the tracks, and immediately my head just starts throbbing and I get super dizzy. I repositioned myself, and it went away. And then I thought, hey, I saw this thing. Wherever you put your ears to the rail, you can see if a train is coming. So I did this. I heard the loudest train noise in my life. It sounded like the train was right next to me. My head started throbbing, and I started getting super dizzy again. Then I got off the track and stood there for a second, and thought to myself, I was probably just hearing things. I go back to the tracks, and I started getting really emotional, and I felt as though something was watching me. Then the throbbing and dizziness happened again, and I actually almost fell and passed out on the tracks. I immediately hopped off the tracks and tried to call my friends to tell them what had happened. Only one picked up. I told him what had happened, and he completely understood. I started walking home with him on the call, and I began to hear quiet train horns in my head. That's when I told him I was going to try randonauting and see if the topic I choose would lead me to the train tracks. I thought of my destiny, and wouldn't you know it, the randonaut location was the local train yard. I went home with my friend still on the call, and I told him I wanted to show him something. I got this fortune card when I was in freshman in high school, and I didn't really believe into it until some of the things on it started coming true. But the last thing it says on the fortune card is, "Beware railroad crossings." Wow, that's crazy. Which has always stuck out to me, as like I said, I've always been close to the train tracks. And there was a railroad crossing right up the track from where all of this happened. This is the end of the story. as I know it's a bit choppy, and I'm not best at storytelling, but it's what happened, and it really creeped me out when it happened. Thank you for reading. Story 12. A true encounter from when I was younger. When I was younger, my best guess would be around 12, I started having experiences with the paranormal. As hard as it may be to believe, I know it was for me. The short experience I'm about to share is 100% true. And it's probably one of hundreds at this point. Somewhere around the age of 12, something shifted in me. The best thing I could really say is that it was as if I'd become a magnet to paranormal things. This is the very first thing I remember happening to me to this day. 20 years later, I'll never forget. One night, I laid down like any other night because I had school the next morning. I fell asleep shortly after laying down. At some point, not exactly sure how long, I suddenly woke up from my sleep. It was almost an instant waking. I was stuck in sleep paralysis. My eyes were wide open, but no matter what I did, I simply couldn't move. It was dark in my room, so that coupled with the sleep paralysis was not pleasant to say the least. Not to mention this was my first experience with sleep paralysis. All of a sudden, my bedroom door slung open and the bedroom light came on. There was this lady, I'd say she looked somewhere possibly in her 50s, that floated in and over the side of my bed. I remember very vividly she didn't walk because my eyes were the only thing I could move, and I was looking over at her through the corner of my eye, scared to death, and she just sort of floated. She had her hair pulled back in something like a bun. She was wearing an older style of clothing. I'm not sure it'd be called colonial or what else it could be called. It was a dress, like women used to wear in the older days, when they had an apron on and churned their own butter. Sorry to laugh, man. Everything about this was colourless, almost frozen in appearance like ice. Yes, when we churned our own butter. She looked like she stepped out of an old colourless TV. She wasn't quite white and she wasn't exactly grey, but maybe more of a blend of the two. The only thing that was different were those guys. Good God, those eyes. I think he spelt guys, but he meant eyes. They were solid white, like her pupils were missing one of those marble statues. She leaned down in an almost creepy whisper and said 3 words. Death Valley Forge. It was at that exact moment the sleep paralysis stopped, and I shot up in bed, screaming, and ran into my parents' room, crying my eyes out. I was scared to death. They convinced me it was a dream and sent me back to bed. I was reluctant, but decided they were probably right. I went back to my room and went to sleep and never saw the lady again. A few weeks after this happened, I realized one thing I'd missed. When I finally got released from sleep paralysis, I'd never stopped to open my door or to turn my light on. I ran out immediately. When I returned, the door was open and the light was on. I didn't open a door or touch the light. So if it was just a dream, then how? This is 100% true, and I've not spoken about it to many people. Since that day, I've had hundreds of encounters. Not sure what happened or why, but continues to this day. Thanks for reading my story. You're welcome. Story 13. The Phantom Piano. Phantom Pianist. When we were kids, my younger brother and I experienced many strange occurrences. A few months ago, I posted one such occurrence about the banshee experience we had. Unfortunately, my little brother died suddenly in our house just under 9 years ago. I'm sorry. When I think back on our time together, I realize that we went through so much unexplainable stuff together. Here's another event that happened in that house, which always sticks in my head. When we were about 10 and 11, at this point, we lived with just our mother as our father would be away from home for extended periods of work. We had a large family, 6 children in total. All of our other siblings were older, at least 10 years older, and they had all moved out. My family is quite musical. Every one of us trained on one instrument or another, including piano. We had a piano in our house at the time, a black Linden piano, a beautiful instrument. My brother and I trained with instructors on this. We always closed the keyboard cover once we were finished using it. On this particular day, my younger brother and I had gotten into a fight over something. We were very close, and as such, fought quite a lot growing up as siblings do. We were upstairs in the hallway physically fighting with each other when our mother came upstairs and separated us. She then went in to clean up the bedroom while my brother and I traded insults from our rooms. Eventually, this escalated back into full physical confrontation again in the upstairs hallway. Our mother walked straight past us and into her room before slamming her door, stating that she had had enough until we stopped. We were not receiving any help or attention from her. I can remember this angering my younger brother, and we started screaming at each other again. An hour or so passed before we again began fighting, and all of a sudden we heard a loud bang of the piano keys from downstairs. This instantly stopped us in our tracks as we both looked at each other in confusion. Then the piano sounded like it was being hit by someone in anger. He pissed off a ghost. The keys bellowed loudly up and down the full scale of the keyboard. Remember, we were just 3 in the house at this time, and we were all upstairs. We didn't have any pets, and we usually kept the lid closed. It sent a jolt of terror through both of us, and we instantly ran to our mother's bedroom door and began banging on it while screaming in panic and fear. Our mother opened the door, and we both rushed in before shutting the door behind us and locking it. The piano had stopped now, and our mother said just to relax in the room as she had been asleep. We lay down either side of her before going to sleep. My mother and brother both fell asleep before me. I soon nodded off also. I woke up sometimes later, completely paralyzed. I began to panic when I heard a low, dull growl coming from the door to the room. It had gotten dark by now. I could only move my eyes. I felt a huge pressure on my chest. I have always and still do suffer sleep paralysis, but I will never forget this one, because the horrible sound of that growl would make multiple appearances from this point in my life onward. In the corner of a room, I could make out the silhouette of a person, and to my horror, it began moving towards me. I tried my best to scream and move in order to wake up my mother, but I couldn't. I could only shift my eyes around in horror. The silhouette became a visibly decrepit old woman with white eyes and dangling greyish-whitish hair in a haggard old face, what's the old hag, that had an unbelievable sadness all over it. One of the weirdest things was the smell that accompanied this thing. I closed my eyes, begging to be able to move for what felt like an eternity, when suddenly, whoosh, like that, my body came back under my control, and I accidentally flipped off the bed due to my struggling while paralyzed. I instantly looked around expecting to see this old woman, but to my relief, she was gone. Everything was calm now. I sat awake in the room until my mother woke up, and I would try to explain everything. She asked me not to tell my little brother because it would frighten him, so I didn't. Like I said, my young brother and I experienced many strange occurrences growing up. This is just one.